Sometimes it takes pretending to be sick to find out who truly loves you. He had everything: money, a mansion, a family. But when he told them he was dying, what happened next exposed every lie, every mask, and every hidden intention. Well, they didn't know. It was all a test. And the one person who passed was the one they never even noticed. This is a story about love that money can't buy, betrayal that cuts deeper than silence, and a decision that changed everything. Watch until the end. You'll never forget it. Jonathan Bennett was the kind of man you'd read about in magazines. Wealthy, respected, and polished. At 50 years old, he lived in a sprawling estate outside of Boston, with marble floors that echoed when he walked alone through the halls. His investments were thriving. His name held weight in corporate circles, and he had everything most people spend a lifetime chasing. But despite the elegance around him, a strange emptiness followed him like a shadow. The silence at dinner, the untouched wine glasses at the other end of the table, the constant ache of being unseen. He had 2 daughters, Amanda and Rachel, who lived in luxury thanks to his relentless effort. Designer handbags, private schools, vacations in the Hamptons, they had it all. But when they called, if they called, it was never just to say, "I love you." It was always about something: tuition, a new car, or another favor cloaked in shallow affection. Over time, Jonathan stopped expecting warmth. He learned to interpret silence as their answer. Still, it hurt more than he'd ever admit. You see, Jonathan wasn't just a businessman. He was a man who once believed in love. A hopeless romantic turned cautious soul. After a bitter divorce, he poured himself into work, convincing himself that success could fill the cracks where intimacy used to live. But wealth doesn't hug you at night. Achievements don't remember your birthday. And deep down, he longed for an emotional connection that wasn't tied to his last name or his bank account. Every year on his birthday, he'd wait, just in case. A phone call, a surprise visit, maybe a handwritten card. But the hours would pass, and the only voice he'd hear was that of Amara, the quiet housekeeper, softly singing in the kitchen while she cleaned. Even then, he never really noticed her. Not fully. She was just there, polite, diligent, invisible. There were moments when the loneliness would hit harder, like on holidays when the house was decorated but lifeless, or when he'd scroll through photos of his daughters on social media, laughing at brunches he was never invited to. That's the thing about emotional abandonment. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And Jonathan was drowning in its quiet ache. He began to feel like an invisible father, a man erased from the narrative of his own family. People envied his lifestyle, but they didn't see the dinner table with just one plate. They didn't see the birthday candles he didn't bother lighting. To the outside world, he was thriving. But behind closed doors, he was just a man with a heavy heart and no one to carry it with. Sometimes, the most heartbreaking truth is realizing that those you gave everything to would never give you the same in return. Amanda once said, "You were always working when we were kids. Maybe that's why we're not close." Jonathan swallowed that guilt whole. He tried to make up for lost time, lavish gifts, trust funds, heartfelt voicemails. But money can't buy belonging. And now, the irony stung deeper. The man who gave him the world was now just a forgotten name on their caller ID. His ex-wife, Margaret, wasn't any better. Their conversations were cold, transactional. Co-parenting had turned into coexisting from a distance. She had remarried quickly, settled into a new life, and treated Jonathan like a chapter she'd rather not reread. He often wondered if his only value had ever been his income. That kind of betrayal from blood doesn't bruise. It leaves permanent scars. Even his closest friends had drifted, some intimidated by his success, others absorbed in their own lives. No one saw Jonathan's heart anymore. They only saw the fortune. He had become a figure people respected but didn't truly know. The truth? He was lonely despite success. A king in an empty castle, surrounded by marble and silence. He began to ask himself questions that crept in late at night. If I disappear tomorrow, who would care? Who would cry? Those weren't dramatic thoughts. They were the quiet agony of a man craving real affection. Loyalty beyond blood. Unconditional care. The kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. And it was in one of those long, sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling fan and listening to the echo of his own breath, that Jonathan made a decision. A quiet, calculated decision that would change everything. Jonathan sat in his study, the city lights beyond the window shimmering like distant dreams. He unfolded a letter he'd drafted, a false diagnosis from a reputable doctor. Not terminal, but serious enough to shift attention. His heart pounded, curiosity warring with guilt. Could love masked in greed be revealed? He needed a test who saw a father or a fortune. He invited Margaret and the girls over under the pretense of a casual dinner. The table was set with his finest china, candles flickering. He dropped the news gently, his voice wavering just enough. They found something, girls. It's serious. His words hung heavy in the room. He studied their faces, searching for genuine care beyond worry for inheritance greed. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. Rachel's hand trembled on the tablecloth. Margaret, composed as always, asked softly about what this meant for his will. Jonathan's heart lodged in his throat. Curiosity turned to a sharp pain. He watched the family rejection play out in slow motion. Could he be betrayed by blood so close? Over the next days, Jonathan observed every visit, every message, every delayed response. Amanda came with sympathy and stories of childhood, heartwarming memories laced with tears. But Rachel asked if she should interview the estate lawyer to get things ready. That contrast stung harder than any insult. Loyalty beyond blood or hunger for wealth. At night, his phone buzzed with texts like, "Hope you're okay," from Margaret. But subtly, others said, "We should sit and talk about your assets." He realized how selfish intentions hide behind caring words. Every faux concern felt like a dagger. He had wanted truth. Now he was buried in its painful truth. He began keeping notes, time of calls, tone of voice, questions asked. He logged each visit's duration and who lingered by the sofa. That methodical approach felt cruel, but necessary. It was a moral awakening. If your own family is money hungry, who really cared? The emotional connection he craved was nowhere to be found. Late nights, he practiced walking slowly, feigning fatigue. He dropped plates in the kitchen, spilled wine on carpets. He wanted to watch who would help without prompting. The curtain was rising, and only she, Amara, seemed destined to play the lead. But he concealed that thought, watching his daughter's reactions instead. Conversations turned calculated. "Need help?" he'd ask. "I'm fine," Amanda would murmur before slipping away. Rachel offered to pick up medication, but only if it didn't interfere with a yoga class. Each dismissal was a silent slap. He felt betrayed by those he gave everything to. That heartbreaking truth weighed on him. But through it all, he noticed a different presence. A steady one. A comforting energy that filled the empty spaces his daughters left behind. He didn't expect this in a house dominated by privilege. Yet, every door she knocked on, every chair she pulled closer, felt like loyalty beyond titles or wealth. He realized this wasn't just a test. It was a lesson in gratitude. And if money couldn't buy true affection, then what was the real worth of his fortune? The more he observed, the more he felt drawn to a revelation that would unravel everything he thought he knew about love and legacy. Just as he prepared to share the fake diagnosis news again, disclosures were brewing behind closed doors. Secrets he hadn't anticipated were surfacing, proof that his silent plan was about to explode. But was he ready for the truth his test would unleash? The next week was filled with staged concern and forced affection. Amanda arrived one morning with a bag of supplements she found online. "This one boosts immunity," she said, placing on the counter like a trophy. But her eyes kept glancing at the shelf where Jonathan stored his financial files. He noticed. Every little detail he noticed now. Rachel came later that afternoon with a bouquet of expensive flowers. "I've always loved this house," she said dreamily, walking slowly through the halls. She ran her fingers along the grand piano, then tapped a photo frame of her childhood self. "I was thinking maybe I could move in, help you out, you know." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The words weren't soaked in love. They were dipped in opportunity. Jonathan sat still and observed. The very people who had made him feel invisible now hovered around him, but something was off. Their visits felt rehearsed, like a scene they were trying too hard to play. The love they offered wasn't unconditional care. It was a shadow of what he longed for, and he could see right through it. Margaret called that evening. Her tone was soft, almost soothing. "I just want what's best for you," she said. Then, like a snake slipping out of the grass, she asked, "You still have the same attorney, right?" Jonathan gripped the phone tighter. The pain of emotional abandonment resurfaced, colder this time. This wasn't concern, it was calculation. He kept the charade alive, faking weakness with every interaction. He shuffled instead of walking, coughed softly at key moments, and let his hand tremble while lifting a teacup. The reactions were always the same, pity laced with silent urgency, as if they were counting down the days, not to pray for healing, but to prepare the paperwork. Amanda brought over a nurse catalog. "Just in case you need full-time help soon," she offered, flipping through it like a vacation brochure. Jonathan nodded politely, but inside his heart ached. Was she already preparing to outsource his care? Had he truly become just an obligation they hoped to transfer? Rachel, on the other hand, started visiting more frequently, but never alone. She'd bring her fiancé, Daniel, a man who spoke more about real estate strategy than about Jonathan's well-being. "This property has incredible resale value," he once whispered, thinking Jonathan was asleep on the couch. But Jonathan heard every word. It was a punch to the gut. And yet, Jonathan never confronted them. Not yet. He wanted to see how far they would go, how much of their true selves they would reveal under the pressure of assumed grief. Each smile that didn't reach their eyes became another piece of evidence. He was no longer a father. They saw him as a financial door slowly closing. He began to wonder what it meant to be loved because of who you are, not what you have. The painful truth was becoming undeniable. The ones he raised, the ones he would have died for, saw him now as a ledger. Every visit carried the silent question, is he close? They didn't bring warmth, they brought watches. Still, Jonathan remained composed. His silence became his strength, and the pain turned into clarity. He saw through their masks, their entitlement, their hunger. And while they thought he was fading, something inside him was awakening. A clarity, a decision. And it all started with the sound of quiet footsteps entering the room. Jonathan woke up the next morning to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses on your chest. He moved slowly, keeping up the act of fragility. His cane tapped against the marble floor as he shuffled into the kitchen, expecting no one. And he was right. The house, once alive with footsteps and chatter, had become a mansion filled with echoes. Amanda had canceled her visit, claiming she had an emergency facial appointment. Rachel sent a text. "Too much on my plate today, Dad. Rest up." Jonathan stared at the screen, the blinking cursor more comforting than their words. No one had asked if he'd eaten. No one offered to keep him company. The emotional abandonment was no longer subtle. It was loud in its absence. He made himself a simple sandwich, dropping a slice of turkey on the floor. As he bent down with effort to pick it up, his hand shook and a tear slipped down his cheek. Not from pain, but from humiliation. At that moment, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man craving real affection, feeling unwanted in a house he paid for, but no longer belonged to. In the afternoon, he tried calling Margaret. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail that he later regretted. "Just wanted to hear a familiar voice," he'd said. When she didn't respond for hours, he sat in the living room, staring at the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. How ironic that a house so grand could feel so cold. That evening, he faked a fall, not out of malice, but desperation. He lay on the floor for nearly 10 minutes before reaching for his phone. Amanda responded with concern, but didn't offer to come. Rachel replied, "Oh no, should we call someone?" The betrayal from blood felt sharper now, wrapped in emojis and exclamation points. The next morning, Jonathan tried walking without the cane, just to feel in control. But the moment he stepped outside for fresh air, he saw Margaret's car parked in the driveway. Hope surged. Maybe she had come to check on him. But when he approached, she was inside, on the phone, discussing Jonathan's estate with her lawyer. He backed away quietly, his heart heavy with silent grief. He spent the next few days isolated. Meals arrived late, laundry piled up, and dust gathered in corners usually cleaned. The staff, sensing the shift in the household, kept their distance too. No one wanted to get too involved in Mr. Bennett's situation. That's what they whispered behind closed doors. He was no longer a man, just a situation. He started journaling at night, not for posterity, but to keep his thoughts from drowning him. "They want my money, not my memories," he wrote. "I gave them everything. Why do I feel like I'm already dead?" Those lines stayed with him, haunting his sleep and waking him with cold sweats. Even dreams offered no escape. But just when the weight became unbearable, he heard a soft knock on the door. It wasn't urgent, nor intrusive, just present. Amara entered quietly, carrying a tray with soup and fresh bread. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, her voice low and warm. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, and something shifted. She didn't ask about the will. She didn't glance at the stocks folder on the table. She just sat with him, spooned soup into his hands, and told him stories about her childhood. There in the silence, Jonathan felt seen, not as a provider, not as a burden, but as a human being, and that changed everything. Amara had been part of Jonathan's home for nearly 8 years. She moved like a whisper through the house. Early mornings, careful steps, quiet rooms. Hired through an agency after Jonathan's divorce, she was never introduced at family gatherings, never thanked in holiday cards. To everyone else, she was just the help. But to Jonathan, without realizing it, she had become the steady pulse in a heartbroken home. She noticed things the others didn't. How he liked his coffee lukewarm with a single sugar cube. That he rubbed his temple twice when he was stressed. That sometimes he'd pause at the hallway photo of his daughters, then turn away with glassy eyes. She never asked questions. She simply offered presence, not performance, an unconditional care that asked for nothing in return. While the others came and went with rehearsed sympathy, Amara stayed. She refolded the same blanket he dropped each night. She hummed soft gospel tunes while vacuuming. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't listening, prayed quietly for his peace. Her kindness was priceless, not loud or flashy, but as grounding as sunlight on a cold morning. Jonathan started noticing her in a way he hadn't before. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something deeper, a recognition, a flicker of gratitude he didn't know how to express. While everyone else looked at him like a ticking bank account, Amara looked at him like a man still capable of being whole. That kind of emotional connection was rare. One morning, he found her in the garden, trimming the roses Margaret once demanded be removed. "They're too old-fashioned," she used to say, but Amara kept them alive. When he asked why, she simply replied, "Old doesn't mean useless. Some things just need patience." That sentence sat with him for days, echoing louder than any doctor's report. There was a quiet dignity to Amara, the kind that doesn't flinch in silence. She never brought up his illness, never asked for details. She just made sure his soup wasn't too hot, his clothes were folded neatly, and his favorite jazz played softly during breakfast. It was care without expectation, loyalty beyond blood. Jonathan found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way she gently wiped dust from forgotten shelves. The way she paused when passing the family portraits, eyes lingering with a mix of respect and quiet sorrow. In her silence, she honored the home more than those born into it. He began to wonder if chosen love over family was possible. Their conversations started to grow. Nothing deep, weather, old songs, favorite foods. But in those exchanges, he found something warm, real, heartwarming. When she laughed, it was soft, unguarded. He hadn't heard that sound in years. Laughter without motive. And it started to heal something inside him. She never asked for a raise, never complained. Even when the other staff began whispering about what would happen when Mr. Bennett passed, Amara remained the same. Steady, grounded, present. Jonathan realized she had seen more of his pain than anyone, yet never used it against him. That loyalty test had only one winner, and she didn't even know she was being tested. One night, he watched her light a candle in the kitchen before turning off the lights. A small habit, unnoticed until now. "It helps keep the darkness from feeling too heavy," she once said. Jonathan stood silently, feeling the lump in his throat rise. Maybe, he thought, real love isn't loud. Maybe it's in the quiet things, the unnoticed gestures, the light left on in the dark. And just like that, something shifted. He didn't need DNA to tell him who really cared. Amara hadn't saved his life, but she had restored something just as sacred, his hope. And what was starting to grow between them would soon challenge everything his family thought they deserved. Jonathan sat by the window one rainy afternoon, a blanket over his legs and silence thick in the air. Amara entered with a cup of chamomile tea, her hands steady, her gaze soft. "Thought this might help the gray pass faster," she said with a gentle smile. No theatrics, no pity, just care. In that moment, Jonathan felt something stir in him. Not obligation, not expectation, just warmth. He watched her walk away, her footsteps light on the wooden floor. She didn't know he was staring. She didn't care. Her loyalty wasn't performative. It was natural, rooted in something deeper than duty. While the others chased the will, she simply chose to stay. She never asked for anything, and yet, she gave more than anyone else ever had. That night, unable to sleep, Jonathan wandered into the kitchen. Amara was there, quietly packing leftovers into containers. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He nodded. "Just thinking too much," he replied. They didn't need many words. The silence between them was safe. It wasn't empty. It was filled with real affection, the kind that money-hungry family could never imitate. He started seeing his home differently. The corners where Amara had added fresh flowers. The bookshelf she rearranged with titles he hadn't touched in years. The coat she quietly mended after it tore on the fence. These weren't tasks. They were signs of chosen love, of someone who cared not because she had to, but because she wanted to. One morning, he overheard a conversation between Amara and the gardener. "He's not alone," she said. "He just doesn't know yet." That sentence hit him like a wave. In a world that had made him feel invisible, here was someone reminding others of his worth. Without him asking, without her needing credit. Jonathan remembered how years ago, Margaret once said, "Kindness doesn't pay the bills." But now he wondered, what if kindness was the only thing that truly mattered? Amara's presence had no price tag, no contract, and yet it had more value than all the luxury cars in his garage. Her actions were a life lesson. The most expensive thing in the world can be someone who genuinely cares. As days passed, he began sharing stories he'd kept locked away. About his childhood, about the night Amanda was born, about how scared he was the first time he held a baby. Amara listened without interruption, without judgment. She laughed at the funny parts, sighed at the heavy ones. No one had listened to him like that in decades. Sometimes, she'd cook meals from her family's traditions. He asked questions. She shared recipes. They laughed about his poor spice tolerance. It was domestic, simple, and yet it felt sacred. A kind of emotional justice was unfolding. After years of betrayal from blood, he was being cared for by someone whose only inheritance was her heart. She helped him up the stairs one evening, her hand firm around his. At the top step, he paused and looked at her. "Why do you stay?" he asked softly. Amara didn't flinch. "Because you're worth staying for." That answer wrapped around his soul like a blanket he didn't know he needed. A redemption arc was quietly taking shape. He began to wonder what life would look like if he chose differently. Not based on blood, but on values over wealth. What if the legacy he left wasn't just money, but something deeper? Something that honored kindness, loyalty, and real love? The thought terrified him, and yet it gave him peace. Because deep down he knew, no matter how much his children expected, no matter what society might say, Amara had already earned something far more precious than his fortune. She had earned his trust, and soon, that truth would demand to be spoken aloud. It started subtly, comments wrapped in sugar, but sharp underneath. Amanda visited with pastries, placing them on the table like peace offerings. "Dad, you've always been a strong man," she said, eyes darting toward his hands. "But maybe it's time we start preparing, just in case." The softness in her voice couldn't hide the urgency. Jonathan stayed quiet, tasting the betrayal she didn't bother to hide anymore. Rachel, less patient, came alone a few days later. She brought documents. "Just some ideas," she explained. "Estate simplification. Probate avoidance. You wouldn't want us to be stuck dealing with a mess, right?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were cold. Jonathan stared at the papers. He didn't touch them. He didn't need to. The heartbreak was already signed in their behavior. Later that week, Margaret returned. She didn't pretend anymore. "You need to think about legacy," she said. "What's the point of building all this if it ends up in the wrong hands?" Jonathan felt the jab beneath her words. The wrong hands. He knew who she meant. Amara. The one person who never asked for anything was now the one they feared the most. He didn't argue. He simply observed. This loyalty test had become a mirror, showing him exactly who each person truly was. The ones who shared his blood were the ones who saw him as an expiration date. Their visits were shorter now, sharper. They wanted answers, not memories. They were chasing the will like dogs chasing a bone. One afternoon, Amanda burst into his study, her mascara smudged, her tone shaking with something like desperation. "You're not telling us everything," she accused. "You've changed. Is someone getting in your head?" He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time, didn't feel guilt. Just grief. The emotional connection had long died. What remained was inheritance greed, wrapped in entitled panic. Rachel followed days later with a harsher edge. "You already live your life, Dad. We're just asking for what's fair." Jonathan blinked slowly. "Fair?" he asked quietly. "I gave you everything." Her silence said more than any reply could. She wasn't ashamed. She felt owed. It wasn't love, it was entitlement with a fake smile. Amara witnessed it all from the background. She never interrupted, never reacted. But Jonathan noticed her eyes shimmering with sadness every time she passed them in the hall. She wasn't just seeing the family's cruelty, she was feeling it. Still, she never said a word. That kind of restraint? That was dignity, not weakness. Jonathan began pulling away. He stopped replying to messages right away. He let calls go to voicemail. The silence drove them mad. One evening, Amanda left a voice message that made his blood run cold. "If you don't make things clear, Dad, you'll be leaving behind more pain than peace." The words weren't a threat, but they weren't love either. And then came the line that shattered him. Rachel, red-faced and trembling, stood in his study and whispered, "You've lived long enough. Why drag this out?" She didn't mean death. Not literally, but the implication was there. Jonathan looked down at his hands, now steady with anger. This wasn't sadness anymore. It was a painful truth he couldn't unsee. That night, he stared out the window, lightning flashing behind the trees. He thought of baby Amanda's first laugh, of Rachel's scraped knee at the park, of bedtime stories and forgotten lullabies. And now, those memories felt like fiction. He was an invisible father, ghosted by time, humiliated by loved ones who only wanted what was left behind. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the one forming inside him. The time for pretending was ending. The masks had fallen, and soon they would all face the truth they worked so hard to avoid. Jonathan called for a family meeting on a Sunday afternoon. No explanations, no details, just a calm but firm invitation. Amanda and Rachel arrived first, tension already coiled in their shoulders. Margaret followed, her lips tight, eyes scanning the room like a courtroom. Amara remained in the background, as always, quiet but present. Jonathan sat in his armchair, hands folded, voice steady. "I want to talk," he began. No one interrupted. The room was still. About the last few weeks. About the way each of you responded. Amanda shifted uncomfortably. Rachel rolled her eyes. Margaret exhaled sharply. Jonathan's tone didn't change. "There's something you need to know. I was never sick." His words landed like glass shattering on marble. For a moment, no one moved. Then Amanda blinked rapidly. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Rachel leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Are you saying this was a game?" Jonathan shook his head. "It was a test. A loyalty test. I needed to know who loved me and who only loved what I could give." The room pulsed with disbelief. Margaret stood up. "You lied to your own children?" she snapped. "To what? Make us feel guilty?" Jonathan didn't flinch. "No, to make myself see clearly." He paused, eyes meeting each of theirs. "You've all shown me more than I ever expected. Not with words, but with silence, with absence, with greed. And now I know." Amanda tried to soften. "Dad, we were scared. That's all." But her voice cracked under the weight of the truth. Rachel didn't even try. "You manipulated us," she said, crossing her arms. "You made us think," Jonathan cut in gently. "I made you think about what matters. And none of you thought it was me." The The silence that followed was heavier than any illness. Amara stood by the door, silent as always, but her eyes shone. Jonathan turned to her and said softly, "Amara, would you sit with me?" She hesitated, then stepped forward, resting on the edge of the couch. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She was the center. "I watched who stayed," Jonathan said, looking at his daughters. "Who listened? Who offered more than empty concern?" And the answer wasn't either of you. Amanda gasped. Rachel scoffed. Margaret's jaw tightened. The emotional justice that had been quietly building now stood in the open, clear, undeniable, earned. "This woman," he continued, nodding toward Amara, "cared for me when no one else would. She brought peace into my home. She showed me what real love looks like, not the kind that's owed, but the kind that's chosen." The words hung in the air like thunder. No one dared speak. The truth was too raw. Rachel's voice cracked under pressure. "You're leaving everything to her, aren't you?" Jonathan met her eyes. "I'm giving my legacy to someone who made me feel human again." Amanda began to cry, not from remorse, but from shock. Margaret simply turned her face away. The family rejection he once feared now felt like freedom. As the storm brewed outside, once again, Jonathan leaned back in his chair. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't cruel. He was clear. And in that clarity, he found something stronger than anger: peace. What came next would change everything. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid to say it. Because some truths aren't meant to be whispered. They're meant to be lived out loud. Jonathan stood up slowly, steady despite the tremor in the room. Amara remained seated beside him, her hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered. He cleared his throat, looking each person in the eye. "I've made my decision," he began, "and I won't be swayed by guilt, entitlement, or pressure. This is not revenge. It's clarity." Amanda opened her mouth to protest, but he lifted a hand. "Please, just listen." The rain outside tapped against the windows like a quiet drum roll. "For years, I've been more wallet than father to you. I excused it. I blamed myself. I thought maybe money could fix everything." His voice softened, "But it never gave me what I really needed, true love, or even real affection." He turned toward Amara, and his face changed. "This woman showed me more care in 3 weeks than I've received in 30 years. A gasp escaped Margaret's lips. Rachel scoffed under her breath. Amanda sat frozen. Jonathan didn't look away. She didn't do it for attention. She didn't do it for reward. She simply did it because that's who she is. "I've lived my life chasing legacy," he continued. "But now I see legacy isn't what you leave behind in numbers. It's what you leave behind in people. And Amara has proven that kindness, humility, and loyalty are worth more than bloodlines soaked in selfish intentions." He let those words sink in. No one moved. "I'm getting married," he said next, simply, "to Amara." Margaret gasped audibly. Amanda looked like the wind had been knocked out of her. Rachel's face twisted with fury. "You can't be serious," she hissed. Jonathan's voice remained calm. "I've never been more serious. Love wins, and I choose the love that stayed. I'm also changing my will," he added. "Effective immediately, Amara is my primary heir. She will receive this house, my assets, and everything I once thought belonged to people who never truly saw me." The room imploded in silence. No screams, just the sound of pride shattering beneath reality. Amanda finally stood. "You're throwing us away for a maid?" Jonathan blinked. "No, you threw yourself away when you saw me as a burden instead of a man." His voice didn't shake. "Amara saw me. She reminded me I'm still worth something. Not because of my money, but despite it." Rachel stormed out. Margaret stood frozen, humiliated by the truth laid bare. Amanda sobbed quietly, the sound small and desperate. But Jonathan didn't move. He sat beside Amara again, her hand gently brushing against his. No show, no performance. Just presence. The kind that mattered. That night, they shared dinner alone. No fine wines, no speeches, just stew, warm bread, and laughter. It felt right. Honest. Jonathan leaned back in his chair and whispered, "For the first time, I'm not scared of tomorrow." Amara smiled, her eyes soft. That's what love does. It gives tomorrow meaning. And just like that, everything the world thought they knew about him, about love, about worth, about family, crumbled and rebuilt into something real. A new story, one rooted in the values money could never buy. And the world would soon learn that his greatest wealth was finally choosing the right person. Because sometimes the most unexpected decisions are the ones that heal us for good. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan's mansion transformed, not in appearance, but in spirit. The hallways no longer echoed with tension. Instead, they filled with quiet conversations, shared meals, and gentle laughter. Amara didn't redecorate. She didn't need to. Her presence was the warmth the house had always lacked. And Jonathan, he had never looked more alive. The town whispered, of course. He married the maid, they said. She must have planned it all along. But those who visited saw something different. They saw an unexpected romance that felt strangely right. A man once lonely despite success, now holding hands with someone who reminded him daily what peace felt like. It was love, simple, deep, and undeniable. Jonathan stopped attending charity galas. He spent his mornings in the garden with Amara, learning the names of flowers she had always cared for alone. She showed him how to tend them gently. "You can't rush something beautiful," she'd say. He wasn't just learning about roses. He was learning about life, slow, sacred, earned. At night, they danced in the living room. Old jazz on a record player. No audience, no announcements. Just the two of them, moving slowly, his hand on her waist, hers on his shoulder. In those moments, all the rejection, the betrayal, the humiliation, it faded. He had found something truer than anything his fortune ever bought. Chosen love over family. Amanda and Rachel disappeared from his life. Margaret sent a few bitter emails, then silence. None of them attended the small wedding ceremony held under the oak tree in the backyard. But Amara's sister came, the gardener, the cook, even the mailman. They cried during the vows, because they knew. They had seen it unfold, the loyalty, the sacrifice, the love that defied prejudice. For Jonathan, it was a moral awakening. A painful truth had led him to the most beautiful reward, a woman who saw his soul when everyone else saw a signature. His redemption arc wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about finding real worth isn't money. It was about discovering the value of a hand that never let go, even when the world turned away. One afternoon, a letter arrived. From Amanda. No apology, just a question. "Is there anything left for us?" Jonathan didn't reply right away. He read it twice, then folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and whispered, "There's always something left, but not everything." His legacy of love had already found its home. In Amara's heart, they grew older together. Shared sunrises, shared worries, shared silence. And with every passing day, Jonathan felt younger, not in body, but in soul. That's the thing about true love. It doesn't erase the scars. It just makes them feel like they were worth surviving. Every heartbreak, every cold dinner, every ignored birthday had led him here. They wrote letters to each other, even while living in the same house. In case one of us forgets how this all began, Amara said. Jonathan smiled every time he opened one. Because no matter how grand the estate, no matter how full the bank account, it was her words that filled the quiet rooms with life. And when visitors came, they no longer spoke of his money. They spoke of her kindness, of their joy, of how a man known for power had chosen love instead. And in doing so, he gave himself the one thing no inheritance could ever promise: peace. Peace wrapped in laughter, in soup, in slow dances, and sunlit mornings. Because in the end, the greatest justice wasn't what he took from the ungrateful. It was what he gave to the one who never stopped giving. Sometimes it takes losing everything or pretending to finally see the truth. Jonathan didn't need more time. He needed honesty. And in a house filled with gold, he found the most valuable treasure in the quiet heart of someone the world refused to see. Amara never begged to belong. She proved it with every silent gesture, every moment of care, every act of love that didn't ask for anything in return. And those who felt entitled, they walked away with nothing but their own reflection staring back at them. Because in the end, legacy isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in love, in loyalty, in who holds your hand when there's nothing left to give. And you, what would you do in Jonathan's place? Would you have seen her? Would you have had the courage to choose love over blood? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your heart. And if stories like this move you, inspire you, or make you reflect, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. There's so much more coming. Stories that heal, challenge, and remind us of what really matters.